Well, yesterday I spoke about, of course, some of the main issues from that point of view. Um, Surely that my experience in Vietnam has been something very important. Uh, my first visit in Vietnam was in '68 during the war. So I went to Saigon at that time because I had some friends there. Because I was already very active against the war in Vietnam, so I could not get a visa in Belgium because they would not allow me to go to Vietnam because of my positions. But I had been invited in different places in Asia, first in Canada and then in Japan, in Korea, etc. So I took the opportunity in Japan to take a visa for Vietnam in Japan, and there I got it. So I could go. So I spent about a week in Saigon with many meetings, and especially almost secret meetings with some of the progressive priests in Vietnam, in South Vietnam, because of the fear of CIA. And it is there also that I had the first experience of a bombing of the B-52 just outside of Saigon. But Saigon was just like an earthquake. You see, the whole thing was moving, and they were bombing at 30 kilometers, you see. So it was tremendous. And I remember the airport was continuous, you see, flights of helicopters, of bombers, etc., etc. It was a tremendous, tremendous experience. And after that, I continued to be committed against the war in Vietnam, and I participate to meetings little all over the world, in Asia, in Latin America, and also in North America. I remember I was in '68, also the same year, little later, in Washington for a meeting of a Catholic movement which invited me. And that was just the day of the invasion of Czechoslovakia by the Soviet Union. So the news came, and they said, we must react, and we will go to the Soviet embassy to protest against the invasion of Prague. So they asked me if I would join. I say, okay, yes, but you don't forget that the war is going on also in Vietnam. So I proposed that they would say a big slogan, out of Prague and out of Saigon. They accepted. So it was a spontaneous manifestation, and they did not advise anyone, neither the police, etc., just went in the street, and we had to go, before going to the Soviet embassy, we had to go through one very big Negro neighborhood. So we were marching with out of Prague, out of Saigon, and people were joining. So when we came to the end, to the embassy, there were several thousand of people because the whole people were coming. And of course the police came, etc., because it was not a permitted manifestation. And so we came. Of course, we could not go to the embassy because then the police stopped at about 200 meters or 300 meters. And then they didn't know how to finish the protest. So they asked me if I could perhaps say a prayer, you know, to finish the protest. So okay, I went to a monument, and then I said, no, of course we have been together to protest against the invasion of Czechoslovakia, against the invasion of Vietnam, and we will pray together the prayer of our Father, you know, so that for peace. And so everyone, of course, joined for praying for peace. So that's how we've finished this protest. But it was interesting because it was in the center of Washington. And then after that, I continue, of course, this work. And then I was invited, because I was at that time the vice president of the Belgium-Vietnam Association. It is at that time that I began to know Mrs. Bin, because she was coming to Europe and I was receiving her in Belgium. And at that time she was just a member of the Liberation Front of South Vietnam. Then after that she became Minister of Education, then Minister of Foreign Affairs, and finally Vice President. And then of course I continue. I was invited the year, I don't remember, 73, 74, for some visit in North Vietnam, just after the war, when the war was finished. And after 2 visits in North Vietnam, I was extremely interested by the possibility of studying, of making some research on a socialist society. And of course, it was a delicate matter, but finally, because of my contacts with the people of anthropology, etc., here, intellectuals, they made a proposal. They said, we want to begin sociology in Vietnam. Because of course, in all the socialist countries, when the socialist government came into power, sociology was abandoned all over, because Marxism had all the answers. So it was not necessary anymore to make sociological research. But then, of course, with all the difficulties that they had, they began to think that it would be good to reinstall sociological studies. And I had known that, of course, in the Soviet Union, in Poland. And when they began to reinstall sociology, instead of inspiring themselves from Marxism, they adopt the functionalist sociology of North America, of the US, because the idea was the system is not functioning totally well. We have to know how to help the system to function. But there was no fundamental question about the system itself. So of course then in Vietnam they asked me if I would be ready to study the possibility of a collaboration. And of course for me it was really a dream, especially that I had worked in Sri Lanka, in India, and then also in most of the other Asian countries, in South Korea, in Japan, in the Philippines, in Pakistan. And so, of course, to make some research in the socialist countries like Vietnam was a very interesting matter. But, of course, I was professor at the Catholic University of Louvain. I was myself a Catholic priest. So, for a socialist country to ask to a Catholic priest of a Catholic university to initiate sociology was not an evident question. So they decided to send 4 of the responsible of the new institute to Louvain for 1 month, because in Belgium they initiate a Ministry of Cooperation, and the Minister of Cooperation was a member of our association, Vietnam-Belgium Association. So I suggested the minister to have one project to help Vietnam to begin sociology. And he was very enthusiastic, and that was accepted. So the Belgian government invited those 4 people, the 4 main people of the institute, and they spent 1 month. And they came to Louvain in order to try to see what was the sociology in Louvain. And they came back very enthusiastic. And I made also a condition. I said, okay, I'm very interested with that collaboration, but there is one condition, that the sociology in Vietnam would be a Marxist sociology, and not a North American functionalist one. And of course they accepted. So we began to, with my collaborator Geneviève Lemercier, who died 15 years ago, and who was really also had adopted also a Marxist approach for sociology, and even sociology of religion, in which we were working. And so we were preparing, we prepared, because they came and then they prepared a new group, because there was no sociologist in Vietnam anymore. So they came from economics, from philosophy, from literature, etc. And there was a group of 30 young people that we had to train. But 5 days before our departure from Belgium, there had been a new Minister of Cooperation who was very anti-communist and anti-Vietnam. And he took the occasion of the intervention of Vietnam in Cambodia to suppress all cooperation with Vietnam. So the whole program that we had made was suppressed from one day to another. And that was 5 days before our departure. And the people from the south of Vietnam, the young people to be trained, were already in Hanoi for the training period. So what I did, I took immediately the contact with NGOs in Canada, in Germany, in Holland, in France, in Belgium, to say, that is the situation, can you do something so that we can continue? And they all accepted. Of course, this was not the same level as the government cooperation, but at least we could go and we could continue the program. So we had this first program here in Hanoi, but it was just after the war. The situation was extremely difficult. We were giving lectures every day in the Institute of Sociology, which now has moved to a better place, and we were giving the courses at the last floor. And you know what is the weather situation of Hanoi in this month, you know? And there was no air conditioning, no ventilation, because most of the time there was no electricity. So it was extremely very hard. And the people, the young people to be trained, the ones who were not from Hanoi had to sleep in the same place where we were giving the courses, on the tables, because there was no other place to go. And we were put in a small hotel with eight rooms, which was a very old one. We have rats big like that going around, you know. And one day, the whole ceiling of my room went down, happily when we were in giving the lectures. So those were very, very hard conditions. But the spirit was extremely good, and so we came, spent 2 months, then the next year 2 months, and then I said to the Vietnamese friends, okay, sociology, okay, we give the basic courses on theory and methodology, but sociology, you don't make that only in the office. You have to go on the ground, in the field. So, okay, they agreed, and they choose a commune here in the delta of the Red River, about 125 kilometers from Hanoi, near the Chinese Sea, which was not the best and not the worst commune to be studied. And so we went there with 30 young people of all the course, and we had made a plan of research. And when we came there, it was a small village of 5,000 people, and there were 4 former small villages, langs in Vietnamese, which were forming the commune. And work brigades were organizing according to the former langs, former villages. And so we divided the young people in 5 teams to go and make the research in the different villages. And we had made a plan to study very comprehensively the history, the production, the administration, the culture, education, health, religion, because it happened to be a village about 80% Catholic. So that was also very interesting for me, because I had studied Catholic minorities in Sri Lanka, in India, etc., to compare. Well, I remember that the first day that we were there, we were accompanied by someone of the party who was supposed to report to the party what we were doing. And when I decided to divide the people in 5 different villages, he was completely lost because he didn't know where to go. So we had to tell him, don't worry, we will tell you everything, everything. And so that was a very interesting experience. After 5 days, all the girls came back to Hanoi, because it was 40 degrees all the time. And of course, no electricity, no ventilation, no. It was very, very hard work. But we spent 10 days in the village to collect all the information. And after that, of course, we worked, especially Geneviève and myself, we brought all the information back to Louvain, and during the year we processed the whole information, and we came back the next year. We completed the information the next year, and then we prepared a report for the Institute, and which was after that published. It was published also in London, it was published in Paris, with the agreement, of course, of the Vietnamese. And that was a very very interesting experiment. See, to see how how the land reform was applied in a village, and what were the results from the point of view of production, from the cultural point of view, from the religious point of view, etc. So that was an interesting, very interesting work. And of course they were very interested by this research. That's why it was published here in Hanoi. And it became a little bit the first sociological study of Vietnamese commune, but also one of the first sociological study of socialist Vietnam. So that this has been circulated very much and serve a little bit as a kind of model of research for the development of sociology in Vietnam. And later on, we came back every year during quite a bit of time till 82. And then we had another experience. Of course, I knew that because being of the Catholic University and being a Catholic priest, my position was, of course, delicate, especially facing some parts of the party. But each time they organized also a meeting and conferences and course in Saigon, in Ho Chi Minh City. And I was a very good friend of the Archbishop of Saigon, who was a very wise man, an old man already. I had known him during the Vatican II Council because I had worked a little bit with the Vietnamese bishops. And so each time I was visiting him, and he was asking me to give some talks to the clergy, to the Catholic clergy, priest. So I accepted that with the agreement, of course, of my friends here, because I had to be prudent. And it went very well, because the Archbishop was intelligent enough to know that the fact that Vietnam was a socialist country, they had to adapt to the new situation. He was not at all stupidly anti-communist, and he was a very wise person, but his clergy was quite anti-communist, because the majority of them came from the north, and they went away when Ho Chi Minh came into power and organized a socialist country. So with the French army and navy in particular, about 600,000 Catholics of the north went to the south with the majority of the clergy. And so those people were very strongly anti-communist. So the Archbishop knew that, and he asked me to give some conference to the clergy to try to reorientate a little bit their position, you know. But
you were supposed to teach them Marxism, eh?
No, not so far. But it was interesting, but it was not easy at all. Anyway, one year when I was here in Hanoi, the Pham Van Dong was the president or prime minister, invited me to have a meeting in the same place where I went yesterday with the presidency. And I was received with my colleague, and one of the things he told us, he said, "I thank you for the work that you are doing with the Catholics in the South." Because he knew that we were trying to ease the situation, and try to avoid completely a complete conflicting situation. One day, I was also a good friend of the secretary of the Communist Party of Saigon, because he had been in Paris during quite a bit of time, and so I had met him, and he was coming to Belgium, and I remember that my mother was inviting him for dinner or supper, and so we could have meetings. So we were good friends, Mr. Ba. I spoke about him with the president, because the president had been also the secretary of the Communist Party of Saigon. And one day, Mr. Ba told me, I would like to meet Archbishop Bin. Can you arrange something? So I said, of course, yeah, pleasure. So one night we had a meeting, a supper, with my colleague Geneviève, the Archbishop Bin, and Mr. Ba. And Mr. Ba began to explain to the Archbishop what were the plans for Saigon, for the development, for the reorganization, for social organization. He was very enthusiastic and explaining, and the Archbishop was listening very respectfully. He didn't say anything. And when Mr. Ba finished, he said, oh yes, this is very, very well. But I wish that the communists would believe a little more in the original sin. And he said it in a very, very sympathetic way. It was but Mr. Ba, of course, did not know what to say, of course. But it was quite interesting to see well the reaction of the one and of the other. Anyway, so I told there has been some incident, because one day the organizers of the Institute told me we would like to invite a French anthropologist who was a good friend of mine and who came to Louvain to teach also, Maurice Godelier. And he was a Marxist. And he had been the assistant of Lévi-Strauss, an anthropologist. And so I said, okay, yes, we can invite him. So invite Maurice Godelier for a seminar on the Asian mode of production. Because Maurice Godelier was a specialist of that, he has written about it. And we, Geneviève and myself, we had studied Kerala in south of India, which was a typical Asian mode of production. We called it more tributary mode of production, because it was not only Asian. We found that also in Latin America with the Incas, or in Madagascar, etc. So, okay. So we had a seminar, and they invited the historians, because of course ancient mode of production. But the historians were all relatively old people, all trained in Moscow, in Soviet Union, with the idea that the Asian mode of production was not existing, because that was not, you know, in the series of modes of production, you know, from the primitive one to the capitalist and socialist, etc. An Asian mode of production was not existing. But we, Geneviève and myself, we had always been extremely prudent in our way of acting here. So, but Maurice Godelier came here without this knowledge of the difficulties that it was to, especially to handle with very dogmatic people. And so, of course, he exposed what was the Asian mode of production. Immediately, all the old historians said, no, that is, Vietnam is semi-feudal, semi-capitalist mode of production, but not Asian. And so, when they were explaining the situation, Maurice Godelier was saying, well, what you say is exactly the Asian mode of production. And then they began to discuss, and one moment they came with the argument of authority. Lenin said that, etc., etc. So Maurice Godelier said, well, if the small father Lenin has said that, he was wrong. Then it was a clash. But such a clash that it was not only intellectual, it was political. So they complained with the Central Committee of the party. They accused Maurice Godelier and myself also that we were bringing heterodox Marxist ideas, and it was very grave. And so that was discussed in the Central Committee, and they decided to stop the seminar. Well, the seminar went on because it was only 3 days, but we had a course to continue the course of sociology that we were giving, Geneviève, myself, and the historians were following the course. And one of the historians was the wife of General Giap. And the decision was, no historian can continue the course. So we could give the course to the sociologists, but no more the historians had to withdraw. The situation became so tense that the director of the Institute of Sociology was a very respected man. He's still living, he's now 96, was crying. And once he asked me to come in his office, he was crying. And he said, I am in an impossible situation. You are a friend of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lee KIu Chi. Could you not speak with him to know what to do? So I asked to meet Lee KIu Chi. He received me, explained the situation, and he said, well, there's nothing to do. Just wait. Just wait. With the time, this will go over. But for the moment, we cannot do anything. Okay. So we finished the course, and we went back to Belgium. And the year after, of course, happily, we finished the program that we had to train the new people of sociology in Vietnam, and we had thought to go to Nicaragua the next year, because the people of Nicaragua were asking us to go there with the Sandinista revolution. And so, okay, then the day before the departure, I received a phone call from the secretary of the president, Pham Van Dong, just to say, Mr. Pham Van Dong is wishing you a very good trip back to Belgium. So I understood what it meant. It meant, I'm sorry for what is happening, but I cannot do anything. Because the problem was in the Central Committee, and here in Vietnam, contrary perhaps to China, the tradition is that there must be a consensus. And if there is no consensus, there is no decision. So they discussed the matter. I was accused by the Ministry of Interior to be an agent of the Vatican. and so all kind of things, you know. But a part of them were in favor of us, and a part of them were against. So they did not take any decision. We could finish the course, but then we had to go. And for 10 years, I could not come back to Vietnam. Of course, perhaps I could have come, but I was working in Nicaragua, and it's only after 10 years that I came back to Vietnam. I didn't say anything, because I did not want to make the things worse. But each time that an ambassador was coming to Paris at that time, because there was no ambassador in Belgium, he was coming from Paris to Louvain-la-Neuve to greet me. So I understood what it meant. He said, that means perhaps you cannot come back for the moment, but be patient. One day it will be over. So that was a very interesting experiment. Anyway, but after that, of course, I have come back, and almost every year, except now the last 4 years, because I was in Latin America with all kind of programs. It is only, but 4 years ago, of course, Mrs. Bin invited me. I had been invited for the 60th anniversary of the Republic with General Giap, and so, of course, the situation is totally normal. But that was the experience of Vietnam. And for me, that has been a very interesting experience because I've been able to understand better what are the mechanisms of functioning of a socialist society, and how the whole problem of land reform, etc. And then after 22 years of the first research in Hai Van, the commune, they asked me here in Vietnam to remake the study in order to see what have been the effects of the Doi Moi, which is the same reform as Deng Xiaoping, no? Opening to the market. So of course we did not have the same number of people to work, but with the Institute and some of the colleagues of the Institute, we reorganized a research to try to see what have been the changes in a village. And that was also very interesting to be able to study the matter after several years. And I published then the book of the two studies together. Of course, the second study was published here in Hanoi also, but I published in Paris the two studies together under the title of a double transition in a Vietnamese commune: transition to socialism, transition to market, in order to precisely see what were the effects. And so the commune, each time, of course, I come back to Vietnam, I go to visit the commune. So next weekend I will be there for 2 days again. And 10 years ago, when I was coming back, I had my 80th birthday. And they invited me with a colleague of my, Vietnamese colleague, one of the sub-director of the Institute, who celebrated now his 90th anniversary the day before yesterday. So that's why I went to his birthday party. We are very, very good friends. He's an historian. He was the historian of Dien Bien Phu. He wrote the history of Dien Bien Phu, a great friend of General Giap. And so because we had our birthday about the same time, the commune invited us. And they organized a big feast because they were very proud of the study. Now they have been known all over Vietnam, also abroad. A picture, cinema, a picture has been done on the Vietnam, on the commune, and so they are very proud. They were very, very interested by also, so that every time they invite me to. And so 10 years ago, they had organized a feast, and evening, Saturday evening, in the house of the Popular Committee. They had met quite a few people of the commune, and all the groups came to give some gift. The girls a shirt, and then the group of the old people were represented by the former secretary of the Communist Party, and they give me a small package in a beautiful paper, and they said, this is a gift of the old people of the commune, and it is the result of our labor. And it was 1 kilo of, how do you call it? Beans, 1 kilo of beans. Yeah. It was wonderful. And after that, they had me a big cake, which was, of course, given around. And they had invited also the director of the Institute of Sociology and some of the colleagues of the Institute. And the director of the Institute of Sociology wrote an official paper which was making me an honorary member of the Academy of Science of Vietnam. So there in the village. It was absolutely extraordinary. And now, next Saturday, they invited again the Mr. Tang and myself to celebrate the 19th anniversary. Of course, the dates are not exactly the same, but anyway, that was it was very. They came here the first day of the meeting. They came, the president and the secretary and another person of the Popular Committee. They came to Hanoi just to tell that they were expecting me for the next weekend in the commune. So really, those are an extraordinary experience because also not only from the intellectual point of view, but also from the human point of view, it is extraordinary. So that is a little bit my experience with Vietnam. Of course, there are many others also, meetings and discussions and conference, etc. That's why in this conference, well, 4 years ago when they invited me, I had more conferences with the Central Committee of the party for the planning of Vietnam till the year 2020, and I had strong discussion with them because I was seeing already what I saw again now, that they were planning with all the instruments of the capitalist system, with the concept of capitalist development, and ignoring totally the natural effect, the effect on nature and social effect. And I see that after 4 years, there is not very much difference. That is a big problem. When we discussed yesterday with Samir and the president, of course we told those things to the president, and I felt that he was very skeptical about our discourse, because of course they have to decide the policy for today and tomorrow. Long term is a long term, but what to do now and tomorrow, you know? And and that is a very, very big problem, because there are very fundamental contradictions between a short-term policy and a long-term policy. And I don't know what they will do in the future. So that's why I was a little bit aggressive during this meeting, because I had thought, yes, if we don't say the things clearly, you know, they will never change or be conscious of the problem. And that's what I met, of course, that the old generation is completely out of this picture. The young generation, yes, but they were not present at our meeting. You know. The young generation, yes, they are much more sensible to those problems, but they have no decision power. We are still in a very Confucianist type of society, so the one who have a certain age have the real power still. And so perhaps it will be a problem of generation. I hope that a new generation will be able to develop another kind of approach to the problems. Yeah. So
this is so interesting. What's happened to the commune now?
The commune, very interesting, yes. The commune has, of course, known the first impressive development during the land reform. Before the land reform, the production was 1 ton of rice per hectare. After the land reform, after 20 years of land reform, it was 9 tons. Without chemical products and without mechanization of agriculture, because it was the war. So they had achieved an extraordinary growth just through different ways. First, a new organization of irrigation. The government had built the big canals, and the people had built the small ones. And that had given the opportunity of transforming the whole irrigation system of the commune. And secondly, by reorganizing labor, organizing collective labor for rice production, but keeping a very small territory around the house of each family for private production, for vegetables, for small animals, for fish, etc. And that was giving almost 50% of the revenue of the family. That was very intelligent, because it was combining the collective production and private production, but without accumulation, for auto-consumption. And in this sense, yes, I was very impressed by that, and also by the cultural aspect, transformation of mentality. I found that also from the religious point of view, because I found the Catholic population by themselves, without the influence of the clergy, who was extremely conservative, came to the conclusion socialism is more, I would say, in coincidence with Christianity than capitalism, because now we are obliged to partake, you know, we are obliged to apply what the gospel is telling us, because of the structural changes. I had known the priest there too, at that time, who had been condemned to death by the communists because he was officer in the French army, and the church was used as a prison for the Viet Minh. And people were tortured in the church. So after the winning of the party of Ho Chi Minh, he was condemned to death. But he had been condemned by Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh had said after the war, okay, so he could come back as a priest. And he had a problem there because he was living with a young girl. And the people were did not like that. So they went to the bishop and said, that is the situation. We don't want this priest. So the bishop said, okay, but I have no other priest. So okay, I can take him, send him some other place. And then they said, no, 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 because they still had a very traditional view of Christianity. And of course, if the priest was not there for the baptism, for the funerals, etc., for them it was just terrible. No? So what to do? Well, they made a protest manifestation against the priest in the village. And the priest was very, very angry. And the next Sunday, he excommunicated. Excommunicate means put away from the church the people who had organized the manifestation against him. And for those people to be excommunicated, as I say, it was just like to go to hell, you know, because of this traditional vision of religion. And so they were extremely disturbed. So they spoke with the party, explained the situation, and the secretary of the party told me the story. And he said, when I saw that, I went to see the priest. And I said, you have no right to excommunicate and to refuse the religious funerals to those Catholics because they opposed you. You have no right to do that. And if you continue, we cut your ration of rice. And that was a solution. So he had to accept, he had to change his decision because of the action of the secretary of the party. And that was, the problem was solved. So I have known him, and I remember when I came back after 10 years of absence, of course he had died. And so when I went there, I asked news, and then they told me, well, he died, of course, and he's buried there near the church, so I went to see it. And after that we had a meeting, and the secretary of the party said, we are very touched that you ask news about the priest. He was the secretary who had the discussion with him. So that was and when I went there 10 years ago, of course I came back later on also, the last few years, but the Saturday night we had the celebration with the party and the popular assembly, and the next day was a Sunday, and by chance it was the feast of the parish. And they had invited priests from outside, from neighboring parishes. And so they invited me to celebrate the Mass with them. And the church was full 1,500 people in a big church, new church that they had built. And so the Saturday I had the feast with the party and the Popular Assembly, and the Sunday with the Catholic parish and the clergy of the region. So that was really a very interesting story. Yeah. So that was now, to continue your question. So the beginning was really a very interesting evolution. So what happened with the doi moi? Of course, the system had come to a certain exhaustion, especially through bureaucratic measures. For example, to calculate the retribution of labor, there were, I think, 42 different categories, you know, according to the points, etc., etc. Just such a complicated system just for a village, you know. And also, the war was finished, and there were new technologies for producing rice, etc. But of course, the small dimension of the commune and the cooperative did not allow them to buy the technologies. So there was some new plans to have a cooperative of machines, of machinery, so that the cooperatives could lend some machine during 1 day or 2 days, etc. And there was a transformation. But then came the doi moi. And the doi moi was the introduction of the market logic. So the result has been surely an increasing in the income of the people. Because of course they were all living in a certain level of poverty, but a poverty in dignity, with schools, with health, with etc. And when you introduce some mechanism of the market, immediately, of course, this brings a betterment of the income. But about 25% of the population did not, were not able to profit of this betterment, economic betterment. So there was a new social distance. Not very great, because in the village, here is very different in the city. But in the village it was not very great. But there was, for many reasons, a part of the population remained poor. And there had been some local initiative to try to meet that. For example, the schools were, of course, still free, but they had to pay for the books. And the poor family could not. So they had a common fund to help the families who were not able to buy the books or things like that. So there was a certain solidarity which came out. But the rest, the 75% or 80%, could better their house, buy some equipment for the house, for the kitchen, etc., etc. So it was really a real betterment. But the cooperatives were changed from productive cooperatives to service cooperatives. And there was the contracts with the families for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. You know? Same system, I think, in China, because of course they are following the Chinese system with a few years later, you know. And so the production went up. Now they are producing 12,000 tons, 12 tons per hectare. But the big race of production was before. Now they increase the production, but how? Chemical products. And a little bit of mechanization of agriculture. And what I saw is that the collective aspect of production and organization has been going down. For example, the channels of irrigation were no more kept well. It was in bad stage because they had no more people, personnel, the cooperative, to make that work, see, because they were reduced. So, classical problem of the passage from a socialist to a capitalist system or market system. Not very much, with not many differences, because it was a small village. But of course here in Hanoi or in the big cities, in the majority of the cities, the majority of the people now are in the cities, you know, where the social differences are much higher than the village. Now I will see after 5 years now that I didn't go there, what is the situation today. What they told me is that of course the social differences have increased, but I like to see that very concretely.
Especially the question of the land, whether they're still owned by the villagers.
No, the land is still state, but there is there are contracting for the use of the land, but not the property of the land. You know, but for the peasants it is almost the same. You know, for them it is they cannot sell their land, but they can give it to their children, etc. So in this sense, yes. But of course, because it is a small village and with many inhabitants, now the agricultural production is only a minority. They have to go work outside, you know, in the district, etc. And there are some other activities which have been developed there. I have tried during the last few years, last 20, 30 years, to get some help for the commune from some NGOs of Europe. We have been able to develop a school system, and the last initiative was to organize a school of informatic, of computer school for the people of the village, so that a great deal of them, so the young people, when they go out, that they have a knowledge already of the computing system, but also to help the village to use computing system also for the production, for the administration of the commune, etc. One of the change I found also is that before my first study, the health system was assumed for 60% by local production. They had a small garden with medicinal plants, and they were a small how do you call that? A small factory, no, not factory, 4 people making the medicine, and that was assuming 60% of the needs of the population. Now it has been finished, and they have a pharmacy with all the pharmacies from outside, 3-4 times more expensive, but local production of pharmaceutical products has been abolished. Also a result of the market. Yes, if we can begin with Camilo Torres rapidly. Camilo Torres.
That also has the the question of to do with so-called violence of guerrilla, and I think people get so confused. Say that we are totally for non-violence.
Yes, definitely. Well, Camilo Torres was a Colombian, and I have known him in 1954 when I first went to Colombia. I was in Latin America for several months at that time to visit the young Christian workers, and when I was in Bogota, the director of the seminary for training priests invited me to give a conference to the seminarians, and so on sociology of religion, and so I did. And after this conference, one of the seminarians came to see me and asking if I could come back another day to have a smaller meeting with a group of seminarians who were interested in social problems. And that was Camilo Torres. So I came back and had an interesting discussion with them. And when I saw the interest of Camilo for social problems, I told him, why don't you ask your bishop to come to Louvain to study sociology? And that has been the case. A few months later, he was coming to Louvain, and he stayed in Louvain during 4 years, 3 years of studies and 1 year as the vice president of a seminar for training especially priests, European priests, to go to Latin America. And when he was in Belgium, he was also more or less adopted by my family. He was always going there to study for his exams, etc. Became a friend of my sisters and brothers, and so we were very close together. And after that, when he came back to Bogota, it was a time where I was making a research on whole Latin America, and I went there in the year 60 to work on the synthesis of the whole. 4 months I remained there. So we worked together. It was at the time that he was appointed at the National University, and they were beginning the sociology department there with another friend of mine who has been a sociologist important in Colombia, Orlando Falsborda. And so we worked together quite a bit. That after that, I saw him very regularly when I was going to Latin America. He came also several times to Europe. I went with him to Argentina for a sociology congress, etc. So we remain very much in touch. And then, of course, I follow the whole history of Camilo. When he came back from Belgium, his idea was, of course, a very strong social commitment, but along the line of what we can call the traditional social doctrine of the Catholic Church, which is very anti-capitalist, but which does not go much further in the analysis, condemning the effects of capitalism, but not the logic of capitalism, and being very afraid of socialism, of Marxism, etc. But himself, because of his commitment, he was at the university, and then he worked also as a member of the Land Reform Commission, as a representative of the church. And then he saw very rapidly that the orientation of the traditional social doctrine of the church was not going far enough. And so he began also to adopt a Marxist approach. for the analysis of societies. And then, of course, the problem became, and the conflict arose with the Catholic Church in Colombia, which was a very conservative church. And finally, he saw that only fundamental reforms could give an answer to the problems of the society of Colombia. And he saw also that it was necessary to have a political action. And he began to political action to try to bring together all the leftist orientations from the from the Christian Democrats to the Communist Party, to try to create a united front facing the oligarchy, which had been dominating Colombian society till today. You know. And so at that time, of course, because of his political action, he was asked by the church to leave the priesthood, because they said that it's not compatible. Your political action is not compatible with priesthood. So he accepted that painfully, and he was fully dedicated to this action of political unity. But then the reaction of the oligarchy has been extremely strong, making his life almost impossible. He was forbidden to, no, the airlines were forbidden to give him an air ticket. So to go in the country, he had to hire private planes and things like that, you know. And finally, his head was put on the price. And he could not sleep 2 nights in the same place, because his life was in danger. So when I saw that, I had contact with him, and I proposed him to go away for a while and make a PhD. And I got a scholarship for him. But several times I spoke with him, and he said, no, I cannot leave the country, because that would be a treason, you know, to the people who are believing in my work, in my action. I cannot leave. So then when I saw that his life was in danger, one day I had a meeting in New York and decided to go back to Europe via Bogota, but I came 5 days too late. He had been in the mountain to join the guerrilla. And of course, his action to join the guerrilla was surely a very conscious decision, but it was also forced by the circumstances. He had no choice. Or to go to the guerrilla. At that time, the guerrilla could be considered as a means to transform society. You had the example of Cuba, and later on you had Nicaragua, etc. Later on, like today, it is not possible. That kind of thinking cannot be anymore developed, and the FARC, for example, the revolutionary movement in Colombia, understood that finally and accepted to negotiate. But at that time, no, it was still possible to think like the Che, you know, the possibility of a revolution. And so he joined the guerrilla, but after 6 months, he was killed. So my opinion was not, of course I am in favor of non-violence, of course. But I don't exclude the fact that in certain circumstances, a violent action on an armed revolution has to be totally excluded, because we are living in a violent world. And we can dream of a non-violent world, but we are living in a violent world. So the problem is, of course, a very difficult ethical choice. And I would have preferred that Camilo would continue to live. It's now almost 50 years that he has been killed. And I was of the idea that a living Camilo was better than a dead Camilo. However, of course, the symbolic effect of his death, of his sacrifice, has been tremendous. And for whole Latin America, as an example also of a Christian giving his life for a transformation of society. And in this sense, of course, that has a sense, that has a meaning. But that is something you don't choose. You don't choose. You can think about that afterwards. So that was my contact with Camilo. And soon, in 2016, there will be the 50th anniversary of his death, and we are preparing that in Latin America with all kinds of publications and films, etc., to celebrate this. That is the, yeah.
But even now you have been to the Zapatistas.
To what?
The Zapatistas.
Zapatista, yeah, of course, yes.
It's also
yes.
very symbolically with arms, but in fact
yeah.
it's a whole movement.
Exactly. Exactly, yeah. And perhaps a small story about some of the contacts I have had with Fidel Castro. I've had several contacts with him on different occasions, but one occasion was the following. There was a seminar organized about Marxist thinking, and I was invited, and I chose as a topic a Marxist analysis of the World Social Forum. I tried to analyze the World Social Forum with a Marxist approach. And the day that I had to intervene, there were 4 people in the seminar, and one was a Chinese, 2 were Latin Americans, and myself. And normally we had 15 minutes to expose. I had written a report, a paper, and I was ready to speak 15 minutes. But the Chinese spoke first 15 minutes about Fidel Castro. and then he entered his own topic, so he took 30 minutes. The other Latin American spoke 25 minutes. Then another colleague, a lady, a good friend of mine, sociologist from Argentina, spoke more or less the 15 minutes. So when I had to speak, the whole time had gone over. And Fidel Castro was there. So I said, well, very sorry, but all my colleagues have eaten my minutes. I don't have minutes anymore. So following the example of the commandant, Fidel, I will be brief. So of course everyone laughed, of course, and Fidel is also, because of you, as you know, he speaks 4, 5, 6 hours, you know. So I began to make my expose and analysis of social forum, and it was just before the Mumbai forum in India. So when I finished, Fidel raised the hand, and he said, well, you have decided in the social forum, World Social Forum, to go to India. And you have decided that just at the moment that Latin America is attacked by the forces of the North, and also at a moment where new political movements are arising in Latin America, and that is the moment that you choose to go out of Latin America. Why? So I said, well, Commandant, it's very simple, because the World Social Forum is a world forum. It cannot only remain in Latin America. And if one pretends that the World Social Forum should remain always in Latin America, that is a Latino-American centrist attitude. Ooh, explosion in the room, you know, in the meeting room. People saying, shooting, saying, why do you accuse, you know, the commandant, you accuse Cuba to be Latino-American central. So, very big discussion. And even the Minister of Culture, who is a good friend, raised up and said, François, you cannot accuse Cuba of being Latino-American centrist, because all the solidarity we have shown with Cuba, with Vietnam, with Angola, etc., all the doctors that we are sending in the whole world. So I said, well, that is not the question. That is not the question. The problem is that a World Social Forum must be world, so we have to also to go to other continents. So Fidel again asked the word and said, no. This is a result of a complot of a few Brazilians with Europeans who have decided that the World Social Forum should go out of Latin America. So I said, well, Commandant, I don't believe in the theory of complot for that kind of thing. It's not a complot. It is just a reality. So then Fidel said, are there social movements in India? So I said, well, Commandant, not only there are social movements in India, but they have 10 more members than all the Latin American movements. You know? 10 more people than 10 more members. So, continuing discussion, and then the people taking, you know, part for Fidel, some others for me, and that was it was at the end of the morning. Normally the session was finished in the morning. There was another one in the afternoon. No break. Continuing discussion till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And at one time, Fidel looks at his watch and said, well, we have biological necessities. We must go and eat for lunch. Okay, so we went for lunch. We came back at 5 o'clock to continue the discussion. And the whole program was suppressed. You know, all the program of the afternoon there was no program. So I had to take the plane in the evening to go back to Europe. I didn't know what to do because Fidel was there. I could not leave, you know, in front of Fidel. So the discussion went on. And it was a very interesting discussion because, but also a very irrational discussion. So finally they finished and I could go rapidly to the airport to take the plane back. And a few months later I was back in Cuba and the Minister of Culture told me, you know, I had a discussion with Fidel and Fidel said he was right. But that was really quite strange, yes, a very interesting experience.
Then how about if you tell us also a story about Hugo Chavez. You have had so much interaction with him.
Yes, that's right. I just wrote a small article which will be published now. It has been published in Ecuador, but it will be published by the Journal of the Casa de las Americas in La Habana. And that is Hugo Chavez and Religion. And of course I had quite a few contacts with Chavez. Invited me twice to Allo Presidente, the Sundays when he speaks to the people, and twice invited me to be with him and to speak also. So the first time I spoke about precisely the religious aspect, and I said Chavez is accused to use religion politically. And I said that is not the case. Because, of course, to say that there is a coherence between a Christian attitude and work for the poor and transform society in function of advantage for the poor, that is not to use religion for political purpose, but it is just to show how a political action can be coherent with a commitment for the poor, a Christian commitment for the poor. So Chavez was listening to that, and then he said, "Why don't you stay a few months with us?" And okay, another time I was invited with him also, and we had there was a discussion about at that time in the papers there was the news that a new gospel has been found, you know, a non-official text of the gospel of the 2nd century or something like that. So he asked me, what do we have to think about that? So of course I did not read the document, so I could not really answer, except that I was saying, well, okay, yes, there are several documents like that, and so the historians have to check the validity first to know if it is authentic or not, etc. And anyway, if it is a document, it has to serve the history. And later on, when I saw him each time, you know, he had he was really a Christian. He was a believer. And he had always a small cross with him. And once I had a very interesting story about meeting him with Fidel in La Habana, when they announced the program of helping the people, especially in Latin America, for the ice, you know, the Operation Miracle. Of course, that was a reference, a biblical reference, you know, the blind people will see, you know. And so they announced that boat. And one moment, again, Hugo Chavez took the small cross and said, you see, Jesus was a first socialist. So for me, he is a reference, you know. And then he turned to Fidel and he said, I'll give it to you. At one moment, Fidel didn't know what to do, but finally Fidel said, I accept it. That was very nice, you see, because it was very spontaneous. It was at a time that they were joking together. I remember that one moment Hugo Chavez said to Fidel, he had fallen and he had broken his leg, Fidel. And Chavez said, Fidel, you have fallen, but that was planned. You have a security service every centimeter around you, and you fall. But that was planned, of course. So Fidel said, well, when you fall with the coup d'etat, you see, that was also planned. So it was very, very, very sympathetic. But the last time I saw, well, when I saw Hugo Chavez several times after that, each time he was asking my blessing and say, François, blessing. That is typical of the simple people facing a priest, asking the blessing of the priest. And several times he said, François, I need your blessing. And so the last time I saw him, it was a meeting of the Sao Paulo Forum in Caracas, of the political parties of the left. And I had been invited to be on the stage of the big hall in Caracas. And then he came. And when he came, I said him, I called him, but he was a little further. And so he said, François, I said. And then he just made one thing, pray for me. And that was at the time that he was already sick, of course. So I understood only later on what was the fundamental meaning of his gesture, you know. So that was the last time I saw him. Yeah. Yeah, it was very impressive. Yeah. Anyway.